The harsh screech of metal rang through the complex like a gunshot, the luxury SUV groaning as it met rising steel. From across the fence came Karen's voice, sharp, frantic, and full of outrage. "What did you do to my car?" The hydraulic bollard now jutted cleanly through the undercarriage of her prized vehicle, shining under the sunlight like Excalibur embedded in steel and engine. Around 30 neighbors stood stunned, one teen letting his soda fall to the ground in slow motion. As for me, I simply sipped my coffee, locked eyes with her, and said coolly, "That's not a parking spot, Karen." But let me be clear, the real issue didn't start with steel. It began with something far more petty, an entitled mindset, an inflated ego, and a woman who believed her HOA title made her invincible. I moved into this townhouse complex 3 years ago after stepping away from a career designing automated defense systems for private firms. I was chasing a simpler life, some quiet, some normalcy. I'd chosen the corner unit for one reason: it had a city-sanctioned emergency exit lane running behind it. As someone who knew the consequences of disregarding safety measures, I respected that exit. It wasn't a driveway, shortcut, or convenient place to leave your car. It was a lifeline, an emergency route designed to get first responders to the rear buildings within a minute. I had it officially approved, paved, and clearly marked with bright yellow cross-hatching. For 2.5 years, not a single person parked there. Then Karen arrived like a thunderstorm wearing a tennis skirt. The day her moving truck rolled in, it blocked the fire lane for nearly 3 hours. That's when I had a gut feeling. I greeted her, handed her a laminated sheet of emergency access guidelines, and even pointed out the signs on both the pavement and the wall. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said, "Sure, whatever, thanks." That smile quickly became my personal early warning system. Karen didn't just move in, she made an entrance. At her first home meeting, she nominated herself as vice president. She even handed out printed copies of her neighborhood improvement plan, which included rules like standardized lawn designs, strict fence color guidelines, and a ban on satellite dishes because they were eyesores. She even tried to limit each home to a single pet. When someone asked what gave her the authority, she responded with a sweet smile and her signature phrase, "Oh, I just care more than most." I heard that line so often, I could hear it in my sleep. The first time her SUV showed up in front of the emergency lane, I assumed it was an honest mistake. Maybe she didn't understand. I knocked, pointed it out politely. She stared straight at me and said, "I just had to unload groceries." "You should mark that better, it looks like a private drive." I gestured toward the 6-foot-wide fire lane sign, the reflective cones, and the laminated city permit on the rear wall. She waved a hand dismissively. "Overkill?" she muttered. Her groceries took 2 hours. Her SUV stayed until dusk. I let it slide barely, but over the following week, her vehicle returned to that lane 3 more times. Each time, I left a courteous note. I even printed out the municipal code outlining emergency lane violations. She ignored every single one. Finally, at a neighborhood brunch, I confronted her directly. "Karen, that lane isn't for parking. You're not just breaking HOA rules, you're endangering people's lives." She laughed and replied, "It's not that serious. Nobody's dying out here." "You act like you're the fire department." The irony would hit her like a freight train later. Everything came to a head during a community fire drill, arranged with the local station as a preparedness measure. The fire engine pulled in through the main gate, rounded the corner, and attempted to access the emergency lane behind my unit. Karen's SUV completely blocked it. The firefighters were forced to drag over 300 feet of hose around the building while mumbling things I'm pretty sure would have gotten them written up. I stood next to Karen as the chaos unfolded. She nonchalantly sipped her lemonade and said, "Well, maybe next time they can come through the front." The fire captain glared at her like she had personally insulted his entire family. The very next morning, I got a visit from Chief Mendoza of the fire department. Short in stature but big on presence, he didn't waste time. "If that SUV's in the way during a real emergency," he said, "people die." I'm not kidding. He handed me a formal recommendation: install a physical barrier, retractable, compliant, and city approved. I looked at the letter, then at her SUV. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up a blueprint I designed years ago for a security contract. It was sharp, efficient, and could destroy anything heavier than a scooter. A hydraulic bollard crafted from stainless steel, programmable, and absolutely legal. Within the week, I had all the permits secured. I contacted a fabrication shop downtown, and they began cutting the parts to my specifications. Installation would take 4 days, wiring another 2. The control system would be discreet, linked to my phone, and concealed inside my garage wall. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to enforce the law without another argument. Karen, of course, wasn't finished testing me. The day the contractor showed up to dig the trench, she marched out wearing a visor and holding a clipboard like she was leading a military inspection. "You can't dig here without HOA approval," she barked. I showed her the city permits and explained the purpose. Her eyes narrowed. "So now you're setting traps?" she snapped. "Is this even safe? What if someone parks there by accident and ends up skewering their car?" I smiled, calm as ever. "Then they probably shouldn't be parking in a clearly marked emergency lane." Later that night, I got an email from the HOA. A stack of citations had landed at my doorstep. Overgrown grass, noise violations due to the trenching crew, and a complaint about unauthorized surveillance equipment referring to the security cameras I'd installed 2 years ago. All the complaints traced back to a single source, Karen. I wasn't even a little surprised. I'd anticipated pushback, but what Karen didn't realize was that every instance of her SUV violating the emergency lane had been caught on video or timestamped, cataloged, and supported by formal complaints. I forwarded the footage, along with a letter from the fire department, to the city's code enforcement office. Their response was just one sentence: "Proceed as planned." The following evening, I stood at the back of my property, watching as the steel cylinder was carefully lowered into place. It gleamed under the lights in a silent and polished. When retracted, it was nearly invisible. But with one signal, just a press of a button, it could rise to full height in under 3 seconds. And once it was up, no car parked illegally would leave unscathed. At best, they'd end up with a dent. At worst, a very expensive tow and an even more public lesson. Karen didn't understand this wasn't just about her car. It was about the consequences of confusing privilege with power and taking a warning as a sign of weakness. I wasn't warning anymore. The morning after the bollard was installed, the whole neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. A strange stillness settled over everything, like the calm before a storm. I stood near the rear gate, sipping black coffee, eyes fixed on the subtle seam in the pavement. That steel post is sleek, silent, deadly. It didn't need to make noise. It just waited. A quiet guardian designed to do one job: protect the emergency lane from the entitled, the oblivious, and the terminally arrogant. And wouldn't you know it, the first test was already on its way. Karen's SUV, shining like some metallic beast, came gliding around the corner. Without pause, she pulled right into the restricted area like nothing had changed. She didn't even glance at the new caution markers I'd installed. Her tires came to rest directly above the dormant bollard. I honestly couldn't tell if it was ignorance or just audacity. With Karen, it was usually both. But I didn't activate the post. Not yet. I wasn't doing this to be petty. I was waiting for the moment that mattered. The point wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. Instead of confronting her, I went inside and pulled up the live security feed on my phone. The system had already recognized her vehicle's mass and was primed. One tap, and the bollard would rise like a hammer. But I waited, because I knew she wouldn't just walk away. She needed a scene. It was who she was. Later that day, while I was working in the garage, Griga, the HOA president, walked up the driveway. He looked like a man choking on his own tie. Greg was the type who thought staying neutral made him wise. In reality, it just made him useless. He offered the awkward smile people wear when they're about to say something incredibly stupid. "Hey, Liam," he said, already fidgeting. "We've gotten a few complaints about some broken bar unauthorized construction behind your unit." I wiped the grease off my hands, raised an eyebrow. "You mean the city-approved emergency deterrent, the one installed at the fire department's recommendation?" Greg cleared his throat like he hadn't heard the sarcasm. "Well, a broken bar, Karen says it's a safety concern. She thinks it's aggressive. And to be honest, A few other board members are worried it might be a beat a broken bar excessive. I almost laughed. The idea that a certified, retractable safety feature was the problem and not the woman repeatedly blocking a fire lane was classic HOA logic. "Greg," I said slowly, "are you aware Karen's blocked the lane over 10 times in just the last 2 weeks? That during a drill, the fire department had to haul hoses around the entire building? That I have signed reports from city inspectors and a formal letter from the fire chief himself?" Greg nodded like a guilty child, tugging at his collar. "Yes, yes. I saw some of Fata broken bar, but she's also threatening legal action, and she's been really aggressive with the whole lately." About a broken bar, well, everything. And there it was. Karen didn't win arguments. She wore people down. Loud, relentless, and exhausting, she bullied her way through any opposition. Most people gave in just to get her to shut up. I handed Greg a laminated copy of my permits. "Tell her to file whatever paperwork she wants. I'd love to meet her lawyer, maybe they can read city code." Greg muttered something about hoping we could all get along, then turned and shuffled away like a man headed into a storm holding a napkin for cover. In the next 2 days, Karen doubled down on her campaign of petty grievances like she was training for some kind of Olympic entitlement event. A notice appeared on my door accusing me of violating fence height regulations. Then came an email about my grass being non-compliant in color. Finally, a message arrived claiming the shade of my side gate didn't align with the community's aesthetic vision. I read that one over coffee and nearly spat it across the room. But I didn't respond. Not yet. I had more important things to handle. The final adjustments to the Bollard sensor system were underway. Now it wasn't just motion-activated, it could detect weight, heat signatures, and movement patterns. A broken bar. I upgraded the sensor suite so the post could recognize vehicle mass, guaranteeing it would never deploy by accident. 3 dozen test cycles later, everyone perfect, I was ready. If Karen wanted drama, I'd supply the stage. All I needed was an audience. That audience showed up on a bright Saturday for the monthly home mixer, an ordeal of tepid lemonade, manufactured small talk, and enough passive-aggressive smiles to power the grid. Karen flourished in that atmosphere, drifting from table to table like a reality TV star hunting for camera time. Behind enormous sunglasses and an even larger clipboard of bylaws, she was the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. At one point she corralled a handful of newcomers, boasting that she practically ran the HOA and that certain residents, wave in my direction, just didn't grasp community spirit. They glanced over, probably expecting to see me breathing fiery, only to find me quietly flipping burgers. Right on cue, she sauntered to her SUV, swung it into the emergency lane yet again, locked it, dropped the keys in her purse, and strutted off as though she'd just signed a peace treaty. She wanted a reaction. Instead, I set my plate down, went inside, and opened the security feed on my phone. There it was, her SUV squarely over the Bollard. Safety check clear, no people nearby. 5 second pause, then I tapped activate. Mechanical poetry followed. The steel column rose silently until it kissed the undercarriage, then a metallic groan, a sharp pop, and a prolonged shriek as 2 tons of luxury vehicle lifted several inches. Transmission fluid sprayed. The rear axle twisted into a shape Euclid never imagined. Then a silence. Across the courtyard, Karen's scream shattered the hush. Barefoot, shoes in hand, she sprinted like her car had been hit by a meteor, shrieking accusations of sabotage. Conversations for hours. A paper plate hit the grass. From my porch, phone still raised, I called out evenly, "Relax, Karen." The cameras caught everything, including violation number 7 of the city code. 2 patrol cars arrived, lights spinning. Karen ranted about killing booby traps. The officers looked lost until I produced permits, the fire department letter, warning signs, and a video of her voluntarily parking on a clearly marked lane. One officer shook his head. "Ma'am, this might be the most thoroughly documented Bollard in town." Karen demanded my arrest. They politely declined. The battered SUV left on a flatbed at night. I leaned on the porch rail, sipped my tea, and murmured, "Finally." But I knew she wasn't finished. Humiliation only fuels people like Karen. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Word and video spread faster than gossip. The retired dentist in 4AB, The college kid in 9AC. Everyone had seen the clip of the Bollard dissecting Karen's SUV. A teenager across the street added dramatic music, titled "A Karen vs. Science-a Guess Who Lost," and racked up 100,000 views in 24 hours. For 48 blissful hours, Karen vanished. No HOA emails, no flyers, no shrieks about fence heights. The villain seemed to have exited midway through the movie. Then she stormed back into an home meeting wearing a suspiciously pristine sling, lugging a tower of paperwork, and scowling hard enough to curdle milk. She demanded an emergency session to address my lethal installation and alleged neighborhood terrorism, her exact phrases. I attended for the spectacle. She distributed fat packets titled "Evidence of Assault and Unauthorized Military-Grade Equipment," insisting I'd installed a hydraulic weapon with intent to cause vehicular broken bar. My trash bin had been overturned, its contents spilled across the driveway like a toddler's tantrum, but only mine. All the neighboring bins stood upright, neat and untouched like little plastic soldiers at attention. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon had thrown a party, but then I noticed something more telling. The security camera above my front porch had been tilted just enough to miss the driveway. Not damaged, just redirected. It didn't take a detective to figure out who was behind it. Karen might have lost her HOA crown, but she wasn't fading into quiet obscurity. No, she was evolving it into a full-time nuisance with a grudge and way too much free time. I checked the backup feed from my garage cam. There she was, clear as day, or rather, infrared, hoodie up like a bargain bin burglar, creeping into my driveway at 2:47 a.m. She used a stick to nudge the porch cam upward, gave my trash bin 2 solid kicks, and strolled off like she'd just performed some great act of vengeance. It would have been funny if it weren't so embarrassingly petty. I saved the clip, backed it up twice, and sent it to Officer Morales with the subject line, "Guess who's back at it?" He replied 5 minutes later with just, "I'll handle it." Whatever he said to her worked. For the next 2 days, the neighborhood was eerily calm. No passive-aggressive flyers, no sabotage, not even a single SUV illegally parked. For a second, I actually allowed myself to believe it might be over, that maybe, just maybe, reality had finally caught up to Karen. I should have known better. Instead of striking in person, she took her crusade online. An anonymous post appeared on a local watchdog blog. Its title screamed in all caps, "Homeowner installs killer machine in family neighborhood." The post featured dramatic screenshots of the Bollard mid-rise, stills from the viral video, and a most absurdly doctored version of her fake injury report. The write-up claimed I had turned my home into a militarized zone and accused me of bullying the HOA into submission using weaponized engineering. The tone read like bad fan fiction mixed with conspiracy theory ranting. But it wasn't the content that bothered me, it was the comment section. Locals quickly called it out as nonsense. But then came the outsiders, paranoid anti-government types, surveillance truthers, even one guy who said I sounded like the Unabomber with a permit. That one made me laugh. But I knew this kind of thing could spiral, so I responded not with emotion, but with evidence. I posted a calm, detailed reply. It included all permits, timestamps, the fire department's letter, and, crucially, an unedited video of Karen ignoring signage and parking on the lane. I even got a fresh statement from Chief Mendoza. Well, once I explained it, I was more than happy to weigh in. People compared the raw footage to the edited spin Karen had posted, and the tide turned fast. Suddenly, the same comment section that had called me a rogue engineer was flooded with praise for the Bollard. Someone even made a fake movie poster titled, "The Bollard, Justice Rises." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be concerned that my safety feature now had fans. Karen, however, was undeterred. Late one night, I heard a metallic clanging sound from outside. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed out only to find Karen standing over the Bollard, wielding a crowbar like she was digging for treasure. Subtlety had clearly left the chat. I shouted her name. She froze for half a second, then bolted, disappearing between hedges, hopping a fence like a teenager sneaking out after curfew. I called the police again. This time, Officer Morales filed a formal charge, attempted vandalism and property tampering. Karen received a direct warning that one more incident would lead to arrest, but that wasn't what shook me. It was her fascia, the look in her eyes before she ran. Not anger, not even panic. Desperation, pure, unfiltered desperation, like someone who had lost everything but still clung to the illusion of control. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just retaliation anymore. Karen was unraveling, her ego, her authority, her sense of superiority all crumbling, and to her, the Bollard had become more than metal. It was the immovable thing she couldn't bully, couldn't manipulate, couldn't override. Then came the real test. That weekend, a major thunderstorm rolled through the area. Lightning, high winds, sudden blackouts. It was chaos. Around 2 a.m., a transformer blew on the east side of the complex. Sparks rained down like fireworks. A loud pop echoed through the neighborhood. Power flickered, then died. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. A faint plume of smoke was rising from a unit 2 rows behind mine. Somewhere, a child was crying. I heard panicked voices. Someone yelled, "They can't get through." And that's when I realized the front gate had been blocked. A large tree branch had collapsed onto the front gate, completely sealing it off. Emergency crews were trying to reroute, and the only alternate access was the emergency lanyard. My lanyard tucked right behind my unit. My pulse surged. I dashed to the control panel and manually triggered the system. With a soft hum and a clean hydraulic hiss, the Bollard sank instantly into the ground. Moments later, headlights pierced the stormy darkness as a fire truck barreled down the lane, its tires splashing through shallow puddles. EMTs jumped out and sprinted toward the smoking unit. Within minutes, they had pulled 2 people to save it, including a toddler with mild smoke inhalation. The neighborhood stood in stunned silence, watching everything unfold. A few people clapped. Someone shouted, "Thank you, Liam." But I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt relief, a relief that, for once, the lane was actually clear. That's when I saw her, Karen. She stood behind the fence line, cloaked in a raincoat, motionless. No smug grin, no ranting, just a blank, distant stare. It was the look of someone who had just watched everything they'd fought against prove its worth in the most undeniable way. The very emergency lane she had tried to block had helped save a life. The next morning, a small box appeared on my porch. Inside was a single cupcake, a typed apology, and a note that simply read, "I was wrong, you were right." I didn't say anything. I didn't post about it. I didn't reply. I just left the box on the kitchen counter and went back to work, knowing full well that not all wars end with banners and speeches. Sometimes, they end with cupcakes and quiet truths. Things shifted after that night. The Bollard was no longer controversial. It was respected, admired, even. People started calling it the Gate Guardian. Kids loved it. One even asked if it had a name. Karen had been officially replaced on the HOA board. Weeks had passed since the court ruling, and while she hadn't disappeared from the neighborhood, her presence had changed. She moved differently now, less like a tyrant, more like a shadow. The clipboard was gone. So was the daily micromanagement of everyone's lives. She didn't yell about flower pots or hand out lawn decor flyers. She had faded into something spectral, always around, rarely speaking, avoiding direct conflict. But that silence wasn't peace. It was a storm, still, but seething. Sure enough, the next hit didn't take long. It arrived as a letter, an official ONIA announcing a citywide emergency response audit. These happened every few years. Standard procedure. But clipped to it was a handwritten note. Might want to triple-check your safety, masterpiece. I didn't need to guess who triggered the audit. Karen couldn't tear the Bollard down legally, so she tried to bury it in red tape. What she didn't know was I had already prepared for this months ago. I spent the next few days running diagnostics on every component: pressure sensors, motion detectors, weight relays. I updated the failsafes, tightened every bolt, and even invited the local fire department for a voluntary demonstration. Chief Mendoza showed up himself, half for curiosity, half for the show. He brought 2 firefighters and a deputy from the city's code enforcement division. I walked them through every detail of the system, presented the full documentation, then ran a live demo. The Bollard dropped in under 2 seconds as the fire truck approached. The chief let out a low whistle and chuckled. "Smoother than half our own gear," he said. The official inspection took place the following Monday. The city inspector arrived looking like he expected to find a battlefield. And Karen? She was already there waiting outside before he even stepped out of his car. She had a bulging folder in hand and dove right in, pointing out safety concerns, citing unmarked hazards, and rambling about child endangerment. She even let her tiny dog wander dangerously close to the emergency lane, clearly trying to manufacture an incident. The inspector looked drained before we even began. I didn't say much, I just walked him straight to the system. I showed him the blueprints, the signed permits, the fire department's endorsement, and the safety test footage. Then I handed him the control. He pressed the button. The Bollard rose smoothly, silently, with precision. He pressed again. It vanished below the surface like a magician's trick. He walked around it, nudged it with his boot, scribbled a few notes. Finally, he nodded. Frankly, he said, this is one of the cleanest installations I've seen in this district. Most people just chain off their fire lanes or toss out a cone. You actually built something functional and future-proof. The inspector's words rang clear, but behind him, Karen's face was slowly contorting, like a balloon stretched too tight. She couldn't hold it in. She cut him off mid-sentence, frantically waving a sheet of paper about neighborhood cohesion, claiming the system I'd built was psychologically aggressive. The inspector looked from her to me, sighed, and said, "Yeehaw, broken bar, I think we're done here." And that was it. The audit was over. Perfect score. 0 issues. No changes required. Karen didn't say a word to me for the next 2 days. She abandoned her fake friendliness, dropped the phony smiles, and disappeared into her house like a dethroned monarch clinging to the last scraps of power. But the neighborhood had already moved on. People smiled more. Families returned to the courtyards. For the first time since Karen's reign began, the emergency lane stayed clear always. It finally felt like a community again. And just when the last ember of drama seemed to flicker out, something real happened, something that tested everything I'd built. It started with a summer storm. Not just rain and wind, but a rare inland lightning burst that shattered the stillness. A transformer exploded near the corner of the block, triggering alarms and plunging the complex into darkness. I was home when the emergency alert came through the radio. Then I caught the smell of acrid smoke, not from my place, but from the far end of the building. An old vac unit had shorted and sparked a fire in one of the units. Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance. But the front gate was inaccessibly blocked by debris. The fire trucks needed access from the rear. The only route, the emergency lane. My emergency lane. I ran outside in the downpour, flashlight in hand, and double-checked the access even though I already knew it was clear. The rain pounded hard. Neighbors began stepping outside, concern painted on their faces, the orange glow of fire reflected in their windows. Karen was there, too, standing silently on her porch, gripping her phone tightly but not dialing. The fire truck turned the corner and raced down the emergency lane. No obstruction, no confusion, no need for confrontation, just a clean, open path. The firefighters deployed in seconds. They doused the flames and pulled a mother and 2 young kids from the rear unit, coughing, shaken but alive. One of the captains gave me a nod from the driveway. If that barrier hadn't kept this lane open, we'd be looking at something much worse. Fast access saved lives tonight. That moment made it all worth it. The arguments, the inspections, the vandalism, the public backlash, everything. Karen had once called it a trap, but to the fire crew, it was a miracle of planning. Later that night, long after the smoke had cleared and the fire trucks were gone, Karen knocked on my door. It was nearly midnight. For the first time, she wasn't armed with documents or wearing that smug mask of superiority. She looked at a broken bar, tired, hollow, human. Gone were the lipstick, the blazer, the posture of righteous fury. Instead, she held something small in her hands. "I brought you something," she said. It was a plastic container with 6 clumsily frosted cupcakes of vanilla, probably store-bought. One was clearly smudged, maybe dropped during the walk. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "About the fire lane. About the Bollard. I still think you're a pain in the neck," she added with a half-smile. "Boot to broken bar, I saw what happened. And it worked. That family could have died." I took the cupcakes, unsure what to say. She waited, maybe expecting a lecture, or smugness, or even a told you so. But I just said, "Glad you saw it in action." She gave a small nod, turned, and walked into the rain. No dramatics, no speeches, just a quiet retreat, and somehow, that was more powerful than any apology. The next morning, a notice appeared on the HOA bulletin board. It stated that the emergency lane must remain clear at all times and that the safety bollard was now officially part of the community infrastructure. There were no objections, not a single one. From that day on, the neighborhood changed for good. Neighbors waved more often, conversations lasted longer, people pitched in for cleanup days without being asked. The emergency exit once the battlefield of lawsuits and egos became something more, a silent guardian, a symbol of what could happen when rules were followed not out of fear, but out of care, because the bollard didn't just protect a fire lane, it protected the heart of a neighborhood, and in doing so, it helped that neighborhood finally remember how to be one. Karen's so-called evidence packet looked like it had been slapped together by a conspiracy theorist with a printer addiction. One page showed a blurry screenshot of the bollard mid-rise, plastered with red arrows and bold captions like it was footage from a daytime true crime special. She even included a printed-out article about landmines as some sort of comparable threat. At one point, she stood up, stared me down, and practically hissed, "This man is dangerous. If he's allowed to keep modifying his property with booby traps, we'll be living in a war zone." I waited until the laughter subsided because there was a lot of it, then stood to calmly address the board. I walked them through the fire department's official recommendation, the permits, and the repeated, documented violations Karen had committed. I presented crystal clear footage of her ignoring posted signage and city code, along with a signed letter from Chief Mendoza verifying that the bollard was fully legal, city approved, and absolutely not a weapon. Then I finished with this: Karen's car wasn't destroyed because of me, it was destroyed because she believed the rules didn't apply to her. If anything, the bollard did its job perfectly. The board exchanged quiet murmurs. A couple of members even thanked me for handling the situation without resorting to confrontation. But Karen wasn't finished. She slammed her palm against the table and demanded that the HOA file a lawsuit against me for damages, emotional trauma, and reckless endangerment. She claimed the incident left her unable to sleep, and then, as if that wasn't deranged enough, she suggested the emergency lane be replaced with a decorative community fountain, a broken bar, because, as she put it, we haven't had a real emergency in years. That's when Griga, the HOA president, finally found a backbone. He leaned forward and said, "Karen, not only is that lane required by city law, but what happened to your vehicle is entirely your responsibility. You ignored warnings, city permits, and basic common sense." Frankly, the board's grateful Liam didn't report this sooner. We could have been fined by the city. Karen's mouth fell open, stunned into silence. When she tried to argue, Greg raised his hand to cut her off. "And regarding your complaints," he added, "the board has voted to dismiss all of them." She stormed out of the meeting, sling flapping wildly, face redder than a stop sign. For a brief moment, I thought we were done. But with Karen, humiliation never means surrender. 2 days later, I learned she had filed a formal complaint with the city's zoning office. In it, she accused me of operating a commercial-grade defense system in a residential area and even suggested that I was being paid by a private security firm to field test equipment on civilian vehicles. The claim was so absurd that when the city inspector called to schedule a site visit, he couldn't stop laughing. "Liam," he chuckled, "we just need to check the installation to cross the T's and dot the I's." But between you and me, no one's ever compared a retractable bollard to a missile defense system before. The inspection went off without a hitch. The inspector reviewed the permits, measured the installation, and even complimented the design. "If more neighborhoods had one of these, we'd have fewer delivery trucks blocking fire lanes," he said. He filed his report within 24 hours and cleared me completely. Karen's complaint was marked unfounded and retaliatory. But even that didn't stop her. One evening I came home from the hardware store to find a small group of neighbors gathered near my backyard fence. They were whispering, pointing toward the emergency exit lane. I approached, wondering what fresh chaos awaited. And there it was, spray painted across the pavement in thick red letters: "Murderer Parking Enforcer, Juvenile, Theatrical." Unmistakably Karen. I checked my security footage. Sure enough, there she was at 3:14 a.m., hoodie pulled over her head, crouched down with a spray can like some knockoff cartoon villain. I filed a police report. The responding officer recognized her immediately. "We've had a few run-ins with this one," he muttered. Karen received a fine for vandalism and a trespass warning. That same afternoon, her newly detailed rental car parked just 20 feet away in a clearly marked red zone was towed. Not by the Bollard, just a regular old no parking violation. It was like Karen was allergic to consequences and mentally incapable of processing that her actions had results. But amid the drama, something surprising began to shift. My neighbors, previously silent, intimidated, or indifferent, started to speak up. One by one, stories came out. Tales of bullying, unfair fines, threats of violations for imaginary rules. People who'd kept their heads down were suddenly done staying quiet. A retired veteran named Mr. Henderson revealed that Karen had once threatened to report him for hosting suspicious backyard gatherings. Turns out it was just poker night. Even Greg admitted she'd pressured him into enforcing non-existent rules just to keep her from raising hell at every board meeting. Soon, a petition began circulating, quietly, respectfully, but with conviction. It called for an emergency vote to remove Karen from her HOA position, citing misconduct and abuse of authority. Within 48 hours, 75% of the residents had signed. The vote was scheduled for the next meeting. Word got out. This time, the community turned out in record numbers. Karen, oblivious, assumed the meeting was about landscaping updates. She even brought muffins. And that morning, just as the sun began to rise over the rooftops, I noticed something strange outside. My trash can had been flipped over,